husband suddenly became incredibly sweet. Then I discovered his secret phone, packed with messages about leaving me. When I confronted him, he simply said he'd tell me when the time was right. Weeks later, he returned to an empty house and completely lost his temper at my parents' home. I'm Claire, 40 years old, and I've been married to Jason for 12 years. We have 2 children. I'm sharing this because I'm utterly lost about what's happening in my life right now, and I'm not sure who else to confide in. It's a lengthy story, so please bear with me. For a little background, Jason and I met in college and started dating almost immediately. Our relationship wasn't a passionate, fireworks everyday kind of romance, but it was steady and reliable. We slowly built a life together, got married after graduation, and had our kids. Honestly, our marriage felt mostly solid, not perfect. No relationship is, but comfortable and stable. Jason has always been a bit reserved. He works in IT, which keeps him busy. He's never been the most outwardly emotional, but he's always been dependable, the kind of husband who ensures bills are paid, takes care of the kids when I'm swamped, and rarely complains. I guess you could say he's the steady anchor of our family. That said, the last few years have been tough. We both fell into a monotonous routine, common when you've been married for a while. Between work, school drop-offs, and after-school activities, it felt like we were more co-parents and roommates than husband and wife. I don't blame him. I was probably just as caught up in everything. We talked less, laughed less, and our conversations mainly revolved around logistics. What's for dinner? What's happening at school? About a few months ago, I noticed a shift. Jason started acting differently. At first it was subtle. One morning he surprised me by making coffee before I woke up and even brought it to me in bed, something that almost never happened. Then he started asking about my day, genuinely listening instead of just nodding while checking his phone. He complimented my cooking out of the blue, even told me I looked nice without me prompting him. I was taken aback but welcomed the change. I thought maybe he realized things were a bit stale between us and was trying to reconnect. I didn't press him or ask why, I just let it happen. Honestly, it felt like we were slipping back into the early days of our relationship, and I allowed myself to hope that things might actually be turning around. But then, a few days later, I stumbled upon something that shattered that hope, replacing it with confusion and fear. One evening, Jason left his phone on the kitchen counter after coming home late from work. It was buzzing non-stop with messages. And I don't know why I looked at it, maybe curiosity, maybe some sort of internal alarm bell. I'm not proud of it, but when I unlocked his phone, he'd left it unlocked, which was unusual. I saw dozens of messages from someone saved as S. At first, I assumed it was just a coworker or friend, but the tone was strange. I scrolled through and realized Jason was talking about leaving, not just for a short break or something temporary, but leaving me. The messages were heartbreaking to read. He was talking about how trapped he felt, how he needed to start over, how he was waiting for the right time to make his move. There were references to secret plans about a place he wanted to go, and about someone named S, who seemed to be the person he was planning this with. The more I read, the worse it got. There were moments where he sounded torn, and moments where he seemed sure and cold. I put the phone down, my hands shaking, heart pounding. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss I didn't know was there. The next morning, I sat him down and asked quietly and carefully, "Jason, is this true? Are you really planning to leave us?" For a moment, he just looked at me, silent. Then he said something that has haunted me ever since. "I'll tell you when the time is right." That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, no promise, just those 6 words that felt like a dagger to my gut. I wanted to scream, to beg, to make him say something more, but instead, I just felt this crushing weight settle over me, confusion, anger, sadness, all at once. In the days that followed, he kept up the act of being sweet, but there was this strange distance underneath it all, like he was playing a role, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried to talk to him, tried to figure out what the right time meant, but he shut down every time. Meanwhile, I was falling apart on the inside. Noah started asking if Daddy was tired or sad, and Emma kept saying she missed her dad when he worked late. I hated lying to them, but I also didn't want to shatter their world with my fears. About 3 weeks after that confrontation, things got worse. Jason disappeared. One morning, he just wasn't there. No note, no call, nothing. I woke up, and he was gone. I tried everything to reach him. Called his phone, which went straight to voicemail. Texted him, messaged his friends. Even called his work. No one knew where he was. I felt like I was living a nightmare, watching my family unravel in real time. I ended up at my parents' house, exhausted and desperate. That's when Jason finally showed up unexpectedly and unannounced. But he wasn't himself. He was angry, frantic, almost unhinged. He barged in, yelling about things I didn't understand, accusing me of things that didn't make sense. It was like the man I married was replaced by someone I barely recognized. I tried to calm him down, but he just lost it. That moment was the tipping point. The place I thought was safe, my parents' home, suddenly felt like a battleground. After that chaotic night at my parents' house, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Jason's sudden appearance was unsettling, but what really shook me was the way he acted, not just angry, but cold and detached, like he was done with me and the life we built. He didn't stick around long, which honestly was a relief because I couldn't handle the tension hanging in the air. But before he left, he said something that still stings whenever I replay it in my mind. He told my parents, right in their living room, that I was the one who pushed him to this. Somehow I was the cause of all this trouble. My parents were stunned. I was too. They've always liked Jason, always thought he was a good husband and father. So to hear him blame me like that felt like a punch to the gut. After he stormed out, my mom hugged me tight and said quietly, "Claire, whatever happens, you're not alone." I clung to those words because I felt completely alone in that moment. What followed was a strange, cold silence from Jason. No calls, no texts, just nothing. In the meantime, I started digging. I needed answers. If he was planning to leave, I needed to understand why and when. I checked his phone again, even though I knew it wasn't right, but every time I looked, I found more messages between him. And what hurt the most wasn't just that he was planning to leave me. It was how he talked about me behind my back. It made my skin crawl. He called me clingy and stifling, said I was always on his case, that I didn't understand what he needed. He said I was keeping him trapped and that freedom was a word I never learned. Reading those words shattered the version of Jason I thought I knew. It was like he'd become someone else, entirely someone bitter and angry, someone who saw me as the villain. And this woman who'd been texting him nonstop, wasn't just some coworker or friend. From what I pieced together, she was someone Jason had met months before. But the worst part, he was making plans with her to start a new life somewhere else, without us. I could tell from the tone of the messages that she was pushing him to cut ties completely. She didn't want any loose ends. I could feel the cold finality in every text. It broke me, but I didn't want to lose control. I needed to keep my head clear. One afternoon, I finally asked Jason's closest friend, Mark, if he knew anything. Mark was tight at first, but after a lot of coaxing, he admitted that Jason had confided in him about feeling trapped and resentful. He said Jason had been distant for months, but didn't realize how serious it was until recently. What Mark didn't know were the secret messages or the plans Jason was making behind everyone's back. Mark still thought Jason was just going through a rough patch, not planning to abandon his family. That gave me a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that maybe Jason wasn't completely lost, but dread because I knew how deep the rot had set in. Days turned into weeks. The house felt emptier by the day. Noah and Emma kept asking where Daddy was. I dodged their questions the best I could, promising he'd be back soon, but even I wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Then, out of nowhere, Jason called. I remember the day clearly. The phone rang in the quiet kitchen. My hands trembled as I answered. He didn't sound like the man I married. His voice was cold, clipped. He told me he was coming back, not to talk, not to fix anything, but to get what's owed. I didn't know what he meant. Was he going to demand money or something else? The fear was suffocating. When he showed up again, this time at my parents' place, it was like the final act in a play I never auditioned for. He was furious, yelling accusations, calling me names in front of my parents, blaming me for destroying everything, and making him hate his own home. But the truth was, he was the one who changed. The man who once held my hand through long nights had turned into a stranger who threatened to rip apart the family we built. My parents were stunned. They told him to calm down, that this wasn't the way to handle things. But Jason wouldn't listen. He looked around, saw the empty house, and completely lost it. He ranted about betrayal, about how he'd been trapped for years, and about how he was done pretending. Then, in a moment that still haunts me, he said, "You'll see what I'm capable of." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew from that night on, nothing would ever be the same. After Jason's outburst at my parents' house, the days that followed were some of the loneliest I've ever experienced. He vanished again, like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of silence that settled over our lives like a heavy fog. His words echoed in my mind, "You'll see what I'm capable of." One afternoon, my sister Rachel came over to help with Noah and Emma while I ran errands. Rachel's always been a pillar of strength, the one person I trusted completely, but even she noticed the change in the atmosphere. When I mentioned Jason's sudden disappearance and his angry outburst, Rachel frowned deeply. "Claire, this sounds serious. Have you thought about talking to a lawyer, or maybe a counselor? I'm worried about how he's acting." I shook my head. "I don't know what to do, Rachel. He's different, not just angry, something darker. I found those messages on his phone, the ones where he's talking about leaving and starting over. And there's this woman, I don't know who she is exactly, but it feels like they're planning something." Rachel's eyes widened. "You need to be careful. People can get dangerous when they feel cornered or betrayed. If Jason's planning to cut you out of his life, it might not just be words." Her warning stayed with me, especially after the next few days. I started noticing strange things around the house, little signs that someone had been there, a moved book, a chair slightly out of place, a drawer left open. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, just on edge from everything. But then, I found it. One morning, Emma told me her doll's favorite blanket was missing. I shrugged it off until I saw the living room window. It was unlocked, and I was certain I'd locked it the night before. Fear gripped me. Had Jason been here? Had he come back without telling me? Was he watching us? I called Mark again, Jason's friend. This time, I was desperate. "Mark, I think Jason might be coming around. I don't know. Has he said anything to you about us or this woman?" Mark hesitated, then told me something chilling. "Claire, I don't know what's going on between you two, but Jason's been tense. He's talked about taking what's his and not letting anyone stand in his way." He sounded like someone ready to fight. I hung up, my stomach twisting. If Jason really was planning to take something, maybe custody of the kids, maybe money, maybe more, I had to be ready. Around this time, I tried reaching out to S. I wasn't expecting her to reply, but curiosity gnawed at me. After all, if she was the person Jason trusted enough to talk about leaving me with, maybe she knew what he was up to. It took a few days, but then she answered. A short, cold message. "Stay out of it." That was it. No explanation, no reason, just a warning. I showed the message to Rachel. She was furious. "That woman is dangerous, Claire. You don't know what kind of influence she has on him. She's pulling the strings, and Jason's just following along." That was when I realized how tangled this had become. Jason wasn't just unhappy or confused. He was under someone's control, and that someone was not just an innocent bystander. The following week, things got worse. One evening I came home from picking up the kids to find a letter slipped under the door. It was from Jason. No apologies, no pleas for understanding, just cold words that made my heart ache. He accused me of destroying his happiness and trying to keep him prisoner. He claimed he was fighting for a new life and told me not to try to stop him because it would only make things worse. But the last line was the most chilling. "You don't know what I'm capable of, but you will." After reading it, I felt the weight of those words settle like a storm on my chest. It was a warning, a threat. I called my parents immediately and stayed with them that night. We talked about everything, and for the first time, I felt a spark of resolve. I wasn't going to let Jason's bitterness and whatever plans he had destroy my family. But even with that determination, I was scared. Jason wasn't just an absent husband anymore. He had become a stranger I barely recognized, a man willing to hurt us all to get what he wanted. After that letter from Jason, I knew things weren't just going to settle down on their own. If anything, the silence between his visits and the cold threats were signs he was preparing for something bigger, and I had to prepare too. I spent a lot of time talking with my parents and Rachel, and they helped me realize that I couldn't stay passive anymore. I wasn't just a wife caught in a failing marriage. I was a mother protecting her children. That meant thinking clearly, acting carefully, and yes, fighting back. The first step was gathering proof. I needed something concrete, something that could hold up if things went to court or worse. I started by carefully tracking everything unusual. I kept copies of all the messages I found on his phone, the letter he slipped under the door, and even the cold reply from S. I didn't want to. Just hope the truth would protect us. I wanted to build a shield around my family. Then came the difficult part, finding out more about S. Who was she? What kind of influence did she have on Jason? Why was she pushing him so hard to leave us behind? I reached out cautiously under a fake account on social media. I watched her profiles, her posts, the people she interacted with. It didn't take long before I realized she wasn't just some innocent friend or coworker. S was someone who thrived on control, manipulative, selfish, and completely willing to hurt others to get what she wanted. She had a history of drama and toxic relationships, and it became clear she was no friend to Jason. She was the force pulling him away from everything that mattered. The more I learned about her, the more I understood why Jason had changed so much. He wasn't himself anymore. He was caught in her web. This realization only strengthened my resolve. If Jason was a puppet, then S was the puppeteer, and I was determined to cut the strings. The next step was about setting boundaries. I told Jason through a lawyer that any contact with the kids had to be supervised, that any attempts to manipulate or scare us would be documented and taken seriously. I made it clear I wasn't going to let him take our family apart quietly. At first, he tried to ignore it, but soon the texts and calls started again thinly. Veiled threats, attempts to guilt me into giving up. I kept them all, adding to my growing collection of evidence. Then came the moment I decided to strike, not with anger, but with strategy. I contacted one of S's former partners, someone who'd been hurt badly by her manipulation. It was risky, but I needed to know if there was a way to expose her influence on Jason. That person was surprisingly willing to talk, sharing stories and evidence of S's toxic behavior. They even had messages and photos, showing her stirring trouble in past relationships, breaking trust, and using people. Armed with this new information, I reached out to a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed to be sure. The P confirmed what I feared. S was actively interfering in Jason's life, pushing him to cut ties and even trying to isolate him from friends and family. With all this in hand, I prepared for the next move. I arranged a meeting with Jason, not to argue, but to confront him with facts. I wanted to see if he was willing to fight for our family, or if he was truly lost to S and her influence. When the day came, I was calm but resolute. I laid out everything, the messages, the threats, the evidence against S. I told him I wasn't going to let this go quietly, that if he wanted to leave, he could. He looked at me then, not with anger, but with something colder, flicker of respect. Maybe, but mostly frustration. You don't understand, he said quietly. It's about finally being free, but I wasn't buying it, not anymore. I told him, freedom doesn't come from breaking people. It comes from facing your problems, not running from them. He left that meeting without another word, but I knew the battle had only just begun. From there, things escalated slowly. Jason started trying to make life difficult, calling at odd hours, showing up unexpectedly. But I stood firm, backed by the evidence and the support of my family and legal team. Every attempt he made to control or threaten was met with calm documentation, and, when necessary, legal pushback. I wasn't just surviving, I was taking control. After months of gathering evidence, standing firm, and protecting my children, the moment finally came when I took decisive action. The day I filed for full custody and officially began divorce proceedings was one of the hardest days of my life, but also one of the most empowering. Sitting across from my lawyer, going over the paperwork, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was finally taking control of the situation, no longer just reacting, but acting in the best interest of my family. The legal process wasn't easy. Jason's attempts to contest custody were expected, but they quickly unraveled once the judge reviewed the mountain of evidence I had compiled. His pattern of disappearing, the threatening messages, and the clear signs that he was under the manipulative influence of S. During one hearing, the judge looked at me and said, "Mrs. Bennett, your priority has been your children's safety and well-being. Your documentation and the testimony presented leave no doubt that it is in their best interest to remain with you." That moment was bittersweet. I wanted to believe Jason was still the man who once cared deeply for our family, but I had to accept the reality. He was no longer that person. The man who came back angry, full of threats, and influenced by someone intent on destruction was someone I couldn't trust near my children. In the weeks that followed the court hearings, the tension in my life seemed to reach a boiling point, as if everything was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Then, one afternoon, it happened. I was home, finishing up dinner, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. When I opened the door, standing there was S. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and filled with a kind of calculated challenge that made my skin crawl. She wasn't just there to talk, she was there to intimidate. Her presence was like a shadow stretching into my home, and welcome and unsettling. She said very little, just enough to make it clear she was trying to assert some kind of control, to remind me that she wasn't going away quietly. I could feel the tension in the air as she lingered for a moment longer than necessary, then left. Without another word, I didn't hesitate. As soon as the door closed behind her, I called the police. The officers arrived quickly, professional and calm. They took my statement, observed the situation, and reassured me that this kind of harassment wouldn't be tolerated. Following their advice, I moved forward with legal action and obtained restraining orders, not only against Jason, but against S as well. This was the official line drawn in the sand. Their attempts to break into my life and threaten my family were stopped cold. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but also a deep sadness that it had come to this. Jason, confronted with these legal roadblocks and the public exposure of his behavior, began to retreat. The calls stopped, the texts disappeared, and the surprise visits became a thing of the past. The silence that filled the space where his presence once loomed was eerie, almost surreal. But it was also a relief. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the next confrontation or attack. I realized painfully that the man I had once loved, the man who was supposed to be my partner, was gone. What remained was a shell, swallowed by bitterness, manipulation, and anger. There was nothing left but echoes of a life that had unraveled. For Noah and Emma, the absence was confusing at first. They struggled to understand why their father wasn't around like before, why visits stopped, and why the house felt so different. But with time, therapy, and a lot of patience, their wounds began to heal. I watched as their smiles returned, tentative at first, then fuller and more genuine. Their laughter gradually filled the rooms again, chasing away the shadows that had settled over our home. Most importantly, their innocent hearts began to trust in safety and stability, once more a gift I had fought tirelessly to preserve. Throughout this ordeal, I leaned heavily on my parents and my sister Rachel. Their unwavering support became my anchor when I was overwhelmed by fear or sadness. They reminded me I wasn't alone. They stood by me through every legal step, every emotional setback, every sleepless night. Together we didn't just rebuild a house. We rebuilt a home, one rooted in love, trust, and security. And through it all, I discovered strength within myself that I never knew I had. I learned that standing up for yourself is not a weakness or a failure. It is an act of courage. I learned to trust my instincts, even when they told me uncomfortable truths. I learned that sometimes what we call love can transform into something unrecognizable and painful, and that having the courage to walk away is sometimes the greatest act of love of all. Looking back now, I see how much I fought not just for my children, but for myself. I fought to reclaim my family, to protect the people I love, and to cut free from the dark shadow of someone who no longer belonged in our lives. Jason's chapter is firmly closed. The bitterness, the threats, the toxic influence, they have no place here anymore. I cut him off completely, and with that severance came a freedom I had not felt in years. The darkness that once clouded our home was finally lifted. The future is still unfolding, yes, but it is now filled with hope and peace. Noah and Emma are thriving, surrounded by people who cherish them, and a mother who will never stop fighting for their happiness. And well, I feel free from fear, free from lies, and free to build the life we deserve. Sometimes the hardest battles teach you not just how to survive, but how to reclaim your own story. And that story now is mine to tell.